Okay, so we have a spaceship. It moves left and right. Hopefully you've tweaked the variables so that it doesn't fly off the screen as soon as you push a button. So it's kind of a bit more smooth. A bit smoother even. Beautiful. So what we're going to do now is we're going to give the ship some spaceship blasters and we're going to give it some rockets to fire as well. Then we'll probably take another break and then we'll put in asteroids and things. Cool. So what we want to do now is spaceship blasters. So currently our ships are quite, they don't really have a bit that rockets come out of. Like for example, this bit on the side here could have a rocket coming out of it. What you want to do is we want to go back to our sprite sheet that we had for the ship and basically customize our ship a little bit. So we're going to use the same sprite sheet and we're going to child some little blasters onto our ship to move along with it. So we're kind of like building up our ship from different parts. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to access the sprite editor. So open up the sprite editor sheet or the sprite editor window. So and go down into your sprites and select your spaceships. So select the spaceships and open up the sprite editor like so. You should have something that looks a bit like this. Cool. So it depends what ship you've picked. So in my case, I've picked a green ship. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to zoom in right away to the little green blasters. And what I've done is I've nicely prepared a couple of blasters for you to pick. So it depends what you want to fire rockets from in the end. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick which one I want. And I'm going to edit one of the slices so that it fits around it. So like we did with the ships, where we basically dragged out an area around it and basically specified this is now a slice. When we clicked automatic, it went round and you can notice that there is basically no gap in between these pixels, or no gap or no transparency in between them. So it hasn't sliced them up. It hasn't, kept the sprites as individual parts. So what I'm going to have to do is kind of do things a bit manually. If you could push a button and make a game from scratch and it does everything and generates everything, we'd all be doing it and we'd all be in the games industry like everyone. But that doesn't exist. So we're going to have to do things manually. So I'm going to pick this blaster here. Of course, you can just pick whichever ones you want. And I'm just going to edit one of the slices down so that it basically fits around this blaster. So this piece here is now a slice. So hopefully you guys will pick which one you want to do and basically just crop down one of the blasters. You could mix and match. So you could have a blue ship with orange blasters or an orange ship with white blasters. It doesn't really matter, just as long as you pick one of them. Groovy. Cool. So what you'll notice is the sprite slice is spaceships _12. So you might have a different number, or you probably will do. So what I want you guys to do is basically rename it. Because like I said before, going through this whole list to find this particular blaster piece and this particular piece of the spaceship is going to be a nightmare. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to name this Green Blaster. And I'm going to click Apply. So clicking Apply is just going to say, yep, I'm happy, I've made some changes to the sprite sheet, I've made some changes to these slices, I want to now apply them. So clicking Apply, I can then go through my, if I go down to my project list, go down my project window at the bottom, where is it? There we go, we have my green blaster there. If I go over to my preview, very pixelated because it's very zoomed in, 6x8 of a green blaster. Awesome. So has everyone got a blaster saved up ready for use? Awesome. Cool. Everyone's full of pizza and kind of a bit sleepy now, right? No one responded, so that means yes. Cool. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to our scene. We're going to select our spaceship and we're going to do some childing. So who can tell me what childing is and what parents are in games? Okay, groovy. I know that you know, Mr. Pixel Dude. Okay, what are they then? Yes. That is absolutely spot on, but you already have a hat, so cool. So basically with parents and children, it's kind of saying this is a holder of this particular property, and that property is going to inherit it. So for example, my dad had dark hair, my mum had dark hair, so I've got dark hair. I'm the children of my parents, so I've inherited that property down. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to say this green blaster, this sprite, is going to inherit things from this green spaceship. So in this case, it's like limbs of a body. So if I go over to my slides, we have Iron Man. Oh, no, we don't. Okay, we have Iron Man. For example, he'll be in different pieces. And then in Unity, what I've done is basically taken the individual arms and basically childed those arms to the body. So as the body moves, the arms are going to move independently, but they're connected to the body. And this is very, very easy to do in Unity. So what we're going to do is we're basically going to say, this green blaster. So what we need to do is I need to drag and drop the green blaster into your scene. Now remember that it's being rendered on the default sorting layer. So we have to change the sorting layer from default to foreground main. And what we have to do is we have to position it where we want that blaster to be on the ship. So you might have picked a different ship. So in this case, my green blaster is here. So what you'll probably also want to do is take that green blaster, duplicate it, and position it at another point in the ship. So basically we've taken from this sprite sheet 2 blasters all ready for use. Like so. So just position them like so, and we now have 2 blaster parts attached. Nice and easy. Cool. Awesome. So what we're going to do with this now is basically say, if I play my game like normal, yeah, my blasters are basically going to sit there, and they're not going to move with it, which is a kind of a problem. I want them to sit along with the ship. So the way that Unity works is it's kind of like, in the hierarchy, it's got all the things building up our scene. So our camera, our background, our spaceship and things. What you want to do is you need to say, these blasters are now children of the spaceship, inherit where they're going to be. So if you select the blasters, both of them, and you drag and drop them like you drag and drop a file onto a folder, onto the spaceship, like so, what you'll notice is that the green spaceship is now kind of like a folder which has 2 little files. So the folder, or the parent, is the spaceship, and then we have the 2 blasters as kind of like the 2 things inside that folder. So what you'll notice now is that when you run Unity, those blaster parts are now part of it. So what you can do with the 2D system and even 3D stuff is basically import all the different parts for your ship or your objects or your characters, and then basically child them to everything and build up this kind of like folder file structure of your car or machine. Or whatever you want it to be, even. Cool. So everyone's got that. It's nice and easy. Just drag and drop. Sorted. Our game is looking much more interesting almost instantly. Cool. So what we're going to do now is, like I said with naming conventions, they're both called Green Blaster. I don't like this, so I'm going to rename them. So the one on the left is going to be Green Blaster, let's call it Green Blaster 1. And on the right is going to be Green Blaster 2. So it could be Green Blaster L and Green Blaster R, but it's going to be Green Blaster 1 and Green Blaster 2. So we actually know which one's which. We don't have a big list of blasters, so we should have our things. Groovy. Okay. So what we're going to do now is basically make some rockets. And the thing that we're going to do now in Unity is a very important thing in making games in general, and that's creating prefabs and master copies. So we're going to build up a rocket, which is then going to have lots of things like collisions, it's going to have its own script, its own animation, and things like that. We're then going to save that rocket as a prefab in our project, and then duplicate it. So a game like Mario, you don't have there isn't someone who sits there and creates all the components and all the behaviors of every single coin in every single Mario game, because A, that would take forever, and B, they're all the same coins, and they all affect the player in exactly the same way, and they all look the same. So what they do is they create one coin, and then make that a master copy, and then just duplicate that coin hundreds and hundreds of times. So fairly simple to do. And then we're going to do that with a rocket. So if you now go into... okay, yeah, let's do that. So if you now select your rocket in your project settings, so down here, select the rocket, then go to the top right-hand corner of the screen. Notice that it's got a current texture type of texture. So what you want to do is you want to change that to a sprite, change that sprite mode from single to multiple, change the pixels to units to 30, and click apply. So I did several things then, but it's all stuff we've done before. So I changed the rockets to a sprite. There's multiple sprites in this sprite sheet, so we changed it to multiple. Now we use pixels to units. We changed it from 100 to 30 for the spaceships, and I've basically made all these sprites to be like about the same size as each other, or within the same scale of each other. So we can change pixels to units to 30, so we keep everything as the same size, the same scale. And then I've just clicked apply, and what you'll notice now is we now have a sprite. Nice and easy. So after you selected the rocket, go to the sprite editor, and you should have something that looks like this. If you don't have something that looks like that, please let me know. Beautiful. Cool. So, I'm going to quiz you. So why would, when I do an automatic slice, why would that not be ideal for this particular sprite sheet? Pardon? Yep, that's true. Because what automatic does is it kind of like goes through and does almost like a cookie cutter out of all the different things. You'll notice that there's absolutely no space in between each of these rocket parts. So what it's going to do is, if I ran it an automatic slice, it's just going to cut the whole thing in one big piece. And that's one big sheet. Now, I don't want my ship to be overpowered and spawn about 11 rockets at exactly the same time, because that would be the easiest game in the world. So what I'm going to do instead is use a grid slice. So if you go to slice in the top left-hand corner, go to type and switch it to grid, what you'll notice here is I could change the pixel size and the Y value. And this is kind of like if you had a flip book. So everyone probably did this at school. Like in the corners of like your books, you draw like a little stick man walking along or a car driving along. Or was that just me who defaced my learning materials? Yeah, you know what I mean. Cool. Microsoft dudes know. So basically what this is it's basically saying how big is each frame? How big is each segment? Now what you've noticed with this rocket is kind of like the rocket stayed exactly the same, but the flame's actually changing through every single frame. This is like a frame-based animation. So it's kind of like a flip book. It's then swapping out this frame for the next frame, for the next frame, for the next frame. It's doing this very quickly. So some games that do this is like Street Fighter, Tekken. No, Tekken doesn't. So like the old Street Fighters, Metal Slug, things like that. They basically have a series of all these frames, and they overlay them and basically flip through this flip book very, very quickly. And obviously automatic's not going to work, so we're going to have to do a grid. So the artist will probably create this flip book and say, oh, each frame is 100 by 100 pixels, for example. That way you can then input how big each frame is going to be. So in this case, I'm going to cheat. 12 by 33. How did you know that, or did you just guess? Okay, you're really trying to get that second hat, aren't you? Cool, so X is 12, so each of these rockets are 12 pixels across. Each of the rockets are 33 pixels tall. Pivot center's fine. If we click slice, notice now that it's basically chopped up by 12 by 33, 12 by 33, 12 by 33. It's basically gone through and it's done a lot of hard work for us, and it's cut all these things up individually. Awesome. And what we're going to do now is we're going to click apply. So after clicking apply, what you'll notice now is when we go back into our project at the bottom, is our rocket is now split up into 8 different frames. And if you have a look in the preview, as I go through them, basically the rocket flame is now going to flicker, because what it's going to do is it's going to cycle through these flames. So those of you who have decent artists in your team, or you have lots of spreadsheets, it's going to be really easy to be able to import all the very beautiful art from your spreadsheets. Cool, awesome. But these are just currently a series of still images. We now need to basically take these and compile them into a clip, a thing that's going to play from start to finish and loop through them, which is actually surprisingly easier than you might think. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take the first rocket, so whichever rocket 0 is, and we're going to drag and drop that into our scene. Now remember that it's being put on the default layer, so we need to change the default layer to foreground main. So we now have a rocket sitting next to our spaceship, like so. Awesome. So currently this is a very static rocket. Basically, if we play it, it's not going to do much. I mean, our spaceship's going to pass underneath it. Our game is looking a bit more interesting. I guess we have some form of interactivity and some rockets here. What we want to do is we want to basically get that rocket playing through its animation. We need to do a couple of things first. Its components are very, very bare. So at the moment, it just has a position. It has a sprite renderer. So we need to add a couple of things to move it. So if we're moving it by a rigid body, what do we need to add? And I kind of just ruined it. So yeah. If we go to add component, add a physics 2D of rigid body 2D, our rocket now has a rigid body, it now has gravity. Another thing that we need to do is when the game starts, I don't want my rockets to just fall straight away. So what we need to do is we need to change the gravity scale of the rockets from 1 down to 0. Awesome. And another thing that we need to do is we need to add a collider. So basically this collider is going to be a way that your rockets can interact with other objects and basically say our rocket hits an asteroid, hits the asteroid and then blows up. Some form of event happens. Because currently we have all these sprites and they're all affected by physics, but they don't have something to basically say this is now touching this or this now collides with this. We need to basically state an edge around the outside. And all games do this, whether it's 3D or 2D. So for example, stairs in games, they look like they have steps, when in reality their colliders are just slopes. And kind of they mask that your feet kind of pass through them. So if you now play like old games like Max Payne 1, Max Payne 2, for example, your feet actually pass through the steps and sort of slide up the stairs, simply because it was too much at the time for like the PlayStation 1 or whatever Max Payne 1 came out on, to have each foot individually line itself up with each step. Whereas I think the latest Zelda game actually does do that now. So what we need to do is we need to do a collider to say this is going to interact with other things. So if I zoom into my spaceship, what we want to do is you want to go to Add Component, Physics 2D, and we have a couple of physics here, a couple of physics that we can use. We have Circle Collider 2D, Box Collider 2D, Edge Collider 2D, and Polygon Collider 2D. So Circle Collider 2D is pretty obvious. All it does is it just draws, if I just show you on the screen, a circle. Great, that's useful for balls, wheels, round pizzas, whatever you want to use. But that's not particularly useful in this scenario because currently our rocket's going to collide with anything inside this area whenever it touches this green area. That outline is kind of like its perimeter. So I'm just going to undo that, basically. You can't get your rocket. Oh, I see. Okay. So you're currently in the sprite editor, like the middleman between taking your project stuff from there and putting it in the game. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our scene, go to the first rocket. Okay, so we need to play around with the sprite slicing. So we need to slice the grid, 12 by 33. Oh, I didn't apply it, sorry. Okay, cool, so we've got one rocket. I went to pick. Oh, okay. Cheers. So we've got one rocket, and what we want to do is we want to go to Add Component. We're going to add some form of physics to it, because we want to push it by force. We're going to change the gravity down to 0, so it doesn't fall straight away. And then what we're going to do now is we're going to go to Add Component, and we're going to add one of these in a second, but I'll just show people like what they all do. So circle collider is kind of normal. It's kind of just for wheels and circles and spheres and snowballs and things. So the next one is a box collider. It's quite difficult to see on the screen. So basically it just adds a green line around the outside edge. So if I go into wireframe mode, it's basically saying this acts like a wall, a block, a platform, a crate, whatever it may be. And whenever you resize the sprite, basically it's going to resize with it. But as you can see from like how our rocket is positioned, if anything interacts here or anything interacts here, it's going to technically collide the rocket, and that doesn't really make sense. So that one's pretty useless in this scenario. So I'm going to get rid of that box collider 2D, and instead the one that we want to use is polygon collider 2D. So select that one. So what polygon collider 2D does is it goes through the sprite and it works out a best fit. So this basically goes around the outside edge and draws out a rough collider around the outside edge. It doesn't do it accurately. It's not like a silver bullet where you push it and it automatically generates a perfect collider. What it does is it kind of like it uses more verts. Uses more verts to basically generate more like a skin. So if I picked up a potato and wrapped it in cling film, took the potato out, it's kind of like that. It's kind of like wrapping its way around it. So what you can see here is it's done a pretty good job. It's a bit better than it's a lot better than the circle. It's a bit better than the box. What you can see here is that each of the corners and each of the sections where it's sort of cut itself off hasn't been completely accurate. What you want to do is you want to move this point to here. So that's quite easy. If you hold down Shift and you hover your mouse over one of the corners, what you'll notice is that one of the points will go into a green square. If you click, you can basically drag the collider and drag all of the pieces and basically sculpt your collider around. So holding Shift allows you to access the parts, move your mouse to a particular area, and basically click and drag your collider around. This is a point where I hear lots of clicking. So as well as selecting each of the corners of your collider and basically then doing that, you can also select partway down a collider. So what you'll notice is that at the moment I'm going to select this corner here and basically it's tied to that corner. Whereas if I move my mouse down towards somewhere on the line, basically I can select anywhere on that line. So if I select this point, basically I can create a new point and you can pretty much sculpt how you want to create the collider. Now what you'll notice is I've added in a couple more points than I need. So if you hold Alt or you hold if you hold Control, it goes red. So Shift if you want to add points and move points. If you hold Control, basically what you can do is you can hover your mouse over the areas, they turn red, and you can delete them. You can basically strip back your collider. So Shift to add and Control to get rid of, basically. And what I want you to do is I want you to build up a basic collider around your rocket that looks very nice and presentable. Now the tricky ones at the moment, our 2D guys know about this, is the ones that are right on the very edge are kind of like a bit of a problem at the moment, and that's something that like some feedback people have had from using these tools. So I think they're looking in how they can sort of bet that. It's a little bit fiddly, but you should be able to build up a wrap around our rocket. So does anyone have a nicer job than that? I'm sure you all do. Cool. So now our collider is going to be a lot more accurate. It's a lot more precise to what our shape is, and we've just sculpted it all in the editor, nice and easy. We don't have to do anything else. Cool. So while some people finish up. Very cool. So we now have a ship, we now have a rigid body, we now have a collider, got all the bits and pieces. So the next thing that we need to do now is we need to add a script to it. It's not going to move by itself, we need to tell it to move. And luckily this script is very, very small. So What we're going to do now is we're going to go down into our folder in the bottom left hand corner, go to our scripts folder and open that up, and go to the create option and create a new C# script and call this rocket behavior. Brand new class, brand new script. So you can see kind of how these scripts are working in Unity. So the spaceship controller we apply to the spaceship, and that spaceship has all the properties about it. Rocket behavior is fairly obvious what we're going to apply it to, the rocket. So what I want you to do is go to the rocket, and on the far right hand side when we have the inspector, we have the sprite renderer, we have the rigid body for the physics, we've got the polygon collider to basically say how it collides with their objects. We need to click add component, go to the script section, and you'll notice that all the scripts within our file, within our project is basically being added. We want to add the rocket behavior to it. Cool. Awesome. So we now have a script just for our rocket. So what I want you to do is I want you to double click that rocket behavior script and open it up. But my mono is kind of blowing up a little bit, so. And what we're going to do is we're going to write some code, and this is going to be specific just for the rocket. Cool. Double click on it and you'll open it up so you can write some code. Cool. So you can probably guess what our rocket is going to have. It's going to have a couple of things. So we're going to have a public float of speed, just like we have with our spaceship. We want to tell our rocket how fast it's going to travel. Every frame we're going to tell it what its velocity is going to do. So as our rocket has a rigid body 2D component, we can write inside update, which runs every frame, rigid body 2D dot velocity, so we're accessing the velocity of that object. And the velocity needs two things. The velocity needs direction it's going to go in, and multiply that by how fast it's going to go. So the direction it's going in and how fast it's going to go. Without these two things, it's basically going to just do nothing. So if we had vector2.right to go right and minus vector2.right to go left, can anyone guess which one this one's going to be? Yes, it's as simple as that. Vector2.up. The very complex thing. And if you wanted to go down, then you just do minus vector2.up. So yeah, you basically just do it in a completely opposite direction. But we're not going to. We do vector2.up, and we're going to multiply that by the speed. So it's going to say every frame increase its velocity and move it upwards using physics. So that's cool. Awesome. So when that's done, and make sure it's attached to the rocket, play your game and play around with how fast the rocket is. So the rocket should travel up, and I want you to play around with set the value at 1,000, set the value at 2, set the value as a minus number and see what it does. Basically play around with it and find a nice, after you play around, find a nice sort of like speed for the rocket to travel in. And I'll leave the code up a bit for you guys. So has anyone got an insanely fast rocket? Cool. How are you doing? You okay? Groovy. That's alright. So has anyone found a nice speed for the rocket to be? Or are people still sort of playing around with it? 3,000 for the speed? Oh, yeah. 3,000 for the speed would be quite interesting, basically. Cool. How you doing? Yep, that's fine. Yeah. I think that's just a screen. On my screen, it's actually black. Yeah. As long as it's not red, then it's fine. Because if it's red, it means that something's kind of wrong. So we've got a rocket. We're going to add a component. We're going to add the script, the rocket behavior to it. And okay, and now we have a speed, so pick a number. 10. Oh, well, that's what we're going to see. That's actually pretty quick. So let's try, I think it's 3 that people liked. I guess that's fine. Let's leave it at 4. Yeah, 4 is actually probably ideal. Awesome. Cool. So we have our rocket. We have it traveling. Let's go back to the code. I think the sweet spot for how fast it was is 4. Groovy. We have a nice rocket traveling over a pink space. Cool. So now that we have our rocket in place, we only have one rocket. We want to multiply. We want to say every time we hit spacebar, every time we touch the screen, we duplicate that rocket and create another one. We create another one. So basically we're creating lots and lots of rockets. So what we need to do is in our hierarchy, we have all the things within our scene. Whereas in our project folder, we basically have all of the assets that we're going to use. So we go to create folder in our project folder at the bottom. We'll make a new project, and name for creating like master copies of things and basically storing objects for later use is a prefab. So we pre-made it. I don't know what the fab bit's for. Cool. Prefabs. Now, before I do this, there's actually something very important I've forgotten to do, which we're all going to do now, and that's go to File, and then Save Scene. So when we go to File, Save Scene, what we're doing is we're kind of saving this level, this snapshot of our current game. So games go through many, many scenes. So a prime example would be Angry Birds, where I guess you'd have your main menu as one scene, and then when you push a button, it will go through to a high score scene, or it will go through to the level select scene. You then pick level 5, it will go into level 5 scene, and basically pushes through to different scenes. It's kind of like different chapters of a book, and you basically push it out to different bits. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new folder, and we're keeping everything neat and organized. This folder is going to be called Scenes. And we're going to save it in there, and we're going to call it something. So I'm going to call it Asteroid Blast. And save that. So now we have a scene called Asteroid Blast, and if we then went off and made a game over screen, or a main menu screen, or a different level perhaps, we just save multiple scenes inside this folder. And this is basically the scene that we're going to use. Groovy. I forgot to do that, and if everyone's machines suddenly closed Unity, we'd have to redo all the stuff, and that wouldn't be nice. Awesome. So now that I've through this prefab folder, what we're going to do inside the prefab folder is we're going to take our rocket, and like we dragged and dropped our rocket into the scene, we're going to select the rocket, and we're going to drag and drop the rocket into the prefabs folder. So we're literally taking the rocket from there, drag it into the prefabs folder, and we're going to let go. And what you'll notice inside the prefabs folder now is we have a little blue box. We have rocket_0. And if I zoom out, we basically now have saved into our project folder a game object with a position, with what it looks like, with a rigid body, with a collider, and with a behavior all on it. And this is all saved for later use. So for example, I can drag and drop as many of these as possible. I have one master copy, and if I now run my game, all of them are going to use exactly the same script, exactly the same behavior. We basically made one master copy and used it many, many times. So has everyone made a prefab out of the rocket? So well, now that we've made a prefab out of the rocket, make sure you definitely have made one, because what I want you to do now is select all the rockets in our hierarchy, so all the ones with our spaceship and things like that, and I want you to delete them. So we have no more rockets, basically. However, we still have this prefab here. We still have the one saved in our project folder, and this is the one that we're going to duplicate many, many times via script. But first, we need to script that, and we're going to script it on the spaceship, because spaceship control is going to be the thing going to say how the spaceship moves and what it actually does. So if we go back to our code and go to spaceship control, what we're going to do is inside update, because every single frame, what we want it to do is we want it to go through and say, is the player pushing spacebar? If it's not, just carry on. If it is pushing spacebar, fire a rocket. So we're going to use a really simple thing. We go if input.get key down, and then in speech marks space, that basically means whenever we hit space, fire off some code inside here. So like this bit section here, whenever we push left, basically fire off this code. So if input.get key down space for the space bar, then not lasers, fire rockets. And run the function of fire rockets. Now that function actually doesn't exist yet. We're about to create that. But basically hit spacebar, it's going to say, go down to this function and then fire off the rockets and do your business here. Cool. So now that we have this done, if we scroll down to the bottom, we have apply force. Let me just get rid of that little code comment. And underneath apply force, what we're going to write void fire rockets. So yeah, basically, when we push spacebar, it's then going to route this down to here, and it's going to run whatever code we have inside here. Like we've got the apply force business here, basically, we have exactly the same here. We're going to do one very simple line of code. So this line of code is kind of like every time anyone learns Unity for the first time, they always do this. This is kind of like like I said, the bread and butter of Unity. And that's creating objects on runtime and removing objects on runtime, so instantiate and destroy. So other people have all sorts of other methods of doing this, but instantiate destroy is kind of like the basis of any game. Like you fire a gun, it's going to instantiate or create a bullet at the end of the gun. If you play, I don't know, you play a golf game, it's going to create a golf ball where your club is and where you're going to hit it. Basically creating objects at some point. You don't position everything inside your game and then run it. Things are going to have to be duplicated, things are going to have to be created. More enemies are going to have to be made, more coins, things like that. So to instantiate something, you have to write a function called instantiate, and then you pass in through the brackets 3 values. So, Mr. Pixel, what are the 3 values of instantiate? So what you need is basically what you're creating, where you are creating it, and what rotation it has. So in Metal Gear Solid, when you walk into like a new area, basically it's going to create enemies for that area. It's going to say, what you're going to create? I'm going to create an enemy. So there would be some form of instantiate code saying enemy, hang on, I'll put the brackets, so I'm going to create the enemy. When we're going to create it at enemy spawn point, so like a certain location in your game, dot position, and what rotation you create it at. And, I taught instantiate destroy to a student, and he said, what's the point of telling something where it's going to be created, the rotation of something is going to be created, like the way it's going to face? That's completely dumb. I said, well, not really, because if I was playing a stealth game and I walked into a room and the enemy patrolling the route was walking backwards or facing a wall, like, it kind of breaks the immersion that they're not a smart player. You want them to be facing the direction they're going to go. And probably the prime example of this is if we didn't tell our rocket which direction it's going to go, it's going to fly back into our ship and blow up our ship. So anytime anyone fires a rocket in their spaceship game, it's going to blow up their own ship if you don't tell them to face a particular direction. So yeah, and he didn't say anything after that. So basically what we're going to do is we're going to take wherever the spawn point is, and we're going to set the rotation. So yeah, enemy spawn point to position, and rotation. Those are the three things you need, and that's all you need to create something. So what I'm going to do is I'm basically going to add three variables at the top, and these are all going to be public. So like we had speed, and we were able to tweak speed and change the value, we're going to have one value which is game object. So this is going to be rocket prefab. So we're going to drag and drop the rocket into this slot and say, you are the thing being created in this script. And we're going to create a transform. So by game object, I literally mean an object with components. So in this case, our rocket. By transform, I mean position, rotation, scale. So you normally use public game object if you want to use something like duplicate a coin or duplicate a particular thing and get, you know, the color of someone's hair, because it gets all of their components. However, when you use transform, that's kind of a bit overkill to do that. So you can use a transform, and all it does is get the position, the rotation, and the scale, and you can access those properties. So in this case, we're going to have rocket spawn point 1, and rocket spawn point 2, because firing one rocket isn't enough. We need to fire 2. Cool. Okay, awesome. So now that we have these variables set up, if you scroll down, we can then pass these things in. So we're going to pass in rocket prefab, rocket spawn point dot position. I'm going to stick these all on new lines so you can see it all, so it's not rolling over. Rocket spawn point 1 dot rotation. Cool. Now, we fired one rocket. We've got one rocket, and we're firing it at spawn point 1. And what we want to do is we want to select exactly the same section of code, duplicate it, and do that. So when we fire off this function, it's going to fire 2 rockets. Pretty cool. Awesome. So who can guess what those spawn points are going to be? We made them earlier on. Yes, the blasters. We're going to basically say these blasters are where the rockets can be created. So create the rockets at those blasters. Those are the locations. Those are the positions. They're already facing up in the rotation, so they're going to go up. Simple. In theory. So we're going to go here. I have some for... I did have an error, but it disappeared, so that's cool. So what I'm going to do now is, if I select my green spaceship, and you scroll down, what you'll notice is that in the editor here, we have the speed of the spaceship, and we have 3 slots. So Unity has a lot of slots you can create variables, basically areas you can drag and drop components in and drag and drop game objects. So whatever we drag and drop into this rocket prefab slot is the thing it's going to create. Whatever we drag and drop into the spawn point is wherever it's going to spawn. It's kind of that simple. You just link things up. So we're going to select our rocket prefab, so our master copy. We're going to drag and drop our rocket prefab into that slot here, so rocket _0. So we want to duplicate that prefab. Then underneath rocket spawn point 1, like so. Drag and drop the first blaster, and underneath spawn point 2, drag and drop the second blaster. So now we should have these variables. So speed of 5, the rocket we're going to create, and the 2 spawn points. And it even says that we're getting the transform as opposed to like all the things about the particular object. So you can see how this is useful for designers, because they can go in and they can just drag and drop things, see what things look like if they spawn at different locations, and change speeds, and yeah, they can customize with it. They don't have to go in and touch the code. You can basically tweak all these variables all in the editor. So when that works, what we want you to do is I want you to run your game and you keep hitting spacebar and spawn hundreds and hundreds of rockets. What the rockets should do is they should fly up. If they don't fly up, then something funny has happened. So everyone got something similar to that. Oh, okay. Cool. Okay, so we have some rockets flying. They look very nice, very interesting. So what we're going to do now is we're going to animate them. And we have this. Does anyone not have something similar to this, where we have rockets flying? Okay, everyone's cool. So currently our rockets are kind of a bit boring. I mean, they fly upwards, they look very stationary, they don't have some form of flames. Well, they have flames, but they're very static, they're very rigid. And if you remember, when we went into our sprites, we have here a series of frames, basically, and if I increase this preview size, you can see that we have a series of sprites basically toggling through the flames, moving them back and forth, like so. Cool. So what we're going to do now is basically get all of these frames and put them together as a clip. So for this, we're going to use a state machine. So this is where things kind of go up to the intermediate / expert level. So what we're going to do is, inside our project, we're going to create a brand new folder. This one's going to be called Animations. And inside Animations, I'm going to create another folder. And this is going to be called Rocket. So we have a new folder called Animations and one called Rocket. So what we're going to do is we're going to make an animation controller, and we're going to make animation clips. So the animation controller is basically going to say, when a certain thing happens in your game, play this particular animation. Go and play this. Your rocket has hit an asteroid, so explode the rocket. All sorts of things like that. So that's what the controller does. It kind of handles what animation is currently playing and what it should be playing next. Animation clips are just data to say, this is what this particular animation looks like, this is it moving from left to right, this is it moving, going through particular frames and things like that. So what we're going to do is, inside the Rocket folder, we're going to click Create, Animator Controller, and we're going to call this Rocket Controller. And what we're also going to make is animation and call this Rocket _ flying. So I just made an animator controller called Rocket Controller and an animation clip called Rocket _ flying. So the controller is going to control when that animation is playing, and the animation clip is actually going to be that bit of animation data to say, over time, it's doing these particular things. Awesome. Cool. So it's fairly obvious where we're going to attach these things to. So what I want you to do is I want you to take your prefab of Rocket and drag and drop it into your scene somewhere so that we can actually visualize it. Even though it's in our project, basically we can now see the rocket and play around with it and basically add different bits and pieces visually. And I want you to scroll down on the components on the right-hand side, and underneath Add Component, we're going to go into here, we're going to go into miscellaneous. And underneath here we have two things. We have animator and animation. So what we're going to do with this is we're going to add an animator to our rocket. So what we should have on our rocket on the right hand side here is a collider, a script, and we now have an animator. So the thing's going to control its animation. Because in the end our rocket's going to have two types of animation. It's going to have it flying as normal in flames, and it's going to have a different one where it's basically exploding. And we need to use an animator controller to basically say which one is playing and when should which one not be playing and things like that. Now one of the most important things with the animator controller is this apply root motion. You want to turn that off. You don't want to apply root motion, because what apply root motion does is it basically plays the animation at its current point and doesn't move it. So our rocket will literally just be flying there like on the spot if it had apply root motion. Whereas what you want to do is you want to turn that off. So that's very important. That should be ticked off. What you notice here is we have Windows 8. Okay, so what you'll notice here is that we have an open slot. So like we had with our script here with the speed of 4, and we have one for a type of material for the physics, we have an empty slot, and this is for an animator controller. So if I zoom out, what we have here is we have rocket controller. So if we go and select our rocket that's in our scene, and we drag and drop rocket controller into that slot. So basically, the rocket should now have a rocket controller. Cool. Okay, but what does this actually mean? I mean, you're thinking, okay, he's just said that it controls all the animations and plays a particular animation when you write some code, but what does it actually look like, or what does it actually do? Well, funnily enough, this is what it does. It allows you to access a state machine. So basically, something that looks, we're going to make a much more simpler one, but something that looks a bit like that. Is anyone terrified by that at the moment and sees that and thinks, oh God, look at that spider web of things just doing stuff? That's actually quite a messy state machine, I'll be honest. And I would not make one like that. I'd probably neaten it up and tidy it up more. But basically what all these little nodes are is animation clips. So basically things to say, the object is currently doing this. So we have in the center here, we have an idle animation state. So I'm going to take Crash Bandicoot as an example. The animation state for Crash Bandicoot is he stands there, he juggles oranges and apples and things like that. And he basically juggles, he pulls faces at the camera, things like that. That's what the idle state does. And basically what that's going to do is it's going to constantly loop over and over again. All these different roads and all these different avenues going off are transitions, basically saying when something happens in the code, go along and play the run animation. When something happens in the code, go on and play the walk animation. When something happens, run the death animation. And these could be anything. So for example, Crash Bandicoot could be in his idle state. Then when the player pushes a control or pushes a button to, for example, run, basically what that does is it basically says, okay, we're now running, this button has been pushed, go to the animator, go down this little path, and go to the run, and basically loop that over and over again. Then when the player is not pushing the joystick, or he's not pushing like an arrow key, what that does is it then says, okay, we're not pushing that, saying go down this path and go back to idle. It's kind of like a big circuit board, and it's saying, or a series of gates to say you can go through this gate or you can go through this gate, and so on and so forth. So you could have, for example, a death animation. So you could say from the idle point, the player runs out of health, so go down and play the death animation of him falling over or things like that. You could then be jumping very high and then goes down to the death animation. You could be running very fast, goes to death animation, things like that. So basically this is a way of kind of combining up animation clips and say, you play this at some certain point. We're going to make a much simpler one of this because this is fairly complicated and fairly messy. I don't like messy things. So yeah. Okay, so here's another example of an animated state. So basically what they've done is they've got different clips for example, a two-handed gun drawn, two-handed gun moving, two-handed gun firing. So this simple like little transition here might be go and play the fire animation when the mouse button's clicks, but go down and do the movement animation when it's not being clicked. It's as simple as that. It's saying what is happening and then go down this path. Now if you want to get really deep with it, you can have blend trees. So this basically says, okay, you have all your animation data, you can now blend the different animation clips in together. So you could have, for example, the legs of a character animating, walking and crouching and things, but then the top half of the character is aiming with a gun, doing a different animation. So you don't have to make a separate animation state for all these different modes. You can basically split the character into different parts and blend them. But we're not going on to this because this is pretty hardcore. We're going to kind of stick towards a more simple animator state. And then after this sort of like day and workshop, you can always add more clips, play around the animator state. We're going to do a thing where we transition the rocket to an explosion. Very, very easy. Cool. So for things in Unity, you kind of now we're phasing in this like controller state. These state machines are really easy to write animation code. It's one line to basically say, go and play this animation now. And basically Unity backend handles all the backend stuff. Awesome. So let's go and do some animation stuff. So we have a new type of window now. So we have the scene view, I mean the sprite editor and the game view. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to window at the top, go down, and we're going to open up the animator. And you'll see something very simple. So this is almost exactly like the one that I showed you, like that big spiderweb mess. But it's a lot more bare because we don't have all our animation clips in. What you'll notice is we'll have an any state animation in. So the any state basically allows any clip to basically go to this point and then play a particular thing. So this is often used for a death animation to like loop it in. So who's here played Team Fortress 2 or League of Legends? Okay, cool. So basically those games have lots of different animations to your character, like running, jumping, firing magic, all sorts of things. At any point you can die in those games. So at any point you can have 0 health. So any of those clips at any stage could say, as soon as you have 0 health, forget whatever your player's doing, go to the any state thing, and then go down to the death animation. So that's kind of what any state's there, and it's kind of left. It's kind of the way to controlling any animation clip playing through this bit here. But we're not going to play around with that. Basically what we're going to do is we're going to fill up our scene here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our rocket underscore flying clip, the one that's inside our little folder. We're going to drag and drop this into the controller area. So we now have a little module or a little node. So we have our little clip of rocket underscore flying. You'll notice there will be orange. That's good. Don't worry about that. Orange basically says this is the first animation clip. So you've all played Temple Run 2. So Temple Run 2, what does the character start doing? What's his first animation? He's running. So basically, the animation clip of him running is the first thing that's playing. Then, as he's running, it then says, okay, now he pushes spacebar, he then jumps, for example. Or now that he's like pushes down, he basically crouches, for example. So basically, the orange one is basically saying, this is the first animation we want. And if you right-click it, you can notice it has a set as default. So if you don't want rocket flying to be the first one, we have that. So we now have an animation on our rocket called rocket underscore flying. Cool. So what we want to do now is we want to go back to our scene. So now that we set that all up, we need to select our rocket underscore flying clip. And what you'll notice on the side here is we have a bunch of options. So this is things like bake into pose, a lot of the stuff you don't need to worry about till later on. But we have a thing called looping. So this basically says, does this animation loop or not? So a walk cycle or an idle animation and things like that, they're going to loop because they're going to get to the end and then go back to the beginning. Whereas something like a character punching or a character firing a gun, those play single, and then you basically play those singly. So what we're going to do is we're going to turn on looping. So we want our rocket to basically loop over time. We want rocket flying to basically have the flames constantly looping over and over again. Cool. Everyone okay with that so far? Is anyone a bit confused? What? Ah. Okay, so which bit? Okay, so you have the animation controller. We've got the rocket flying. Okay, so what we're doing is we're basically saying this rocket here is going to have some animations on it. So what we need to do is we have the animated controller. That's cool. We have the controller. So the controller basically says when an animation is playing. So when it hits an asteroid, stop playing this one, play the explosion. That basically handles all the links and things like that. So if we go to window at the top, I'm basically going to hide this now. If we go to window at the top, and we go down to the animator, basically this system is kind of like your spiderweb grid,
where you basically put all your animation clips on and then basically say, you go to you when something particular thing happens. So what we need to do is we need to take our clip of rocket flying, drag and drop that in. So we now have our clip in here. And it's orange to say this is the first clip it's going to play. So temple run, he's constantly running at the beginning and things like that. So that's fine. So we now have rocket flying under the rocket controller on the rocket. So now the rocket is going to be having a flying animation. And it'll all make sense at the end. Okay, that's cool. Oh god. Okay, cool.
Awesome. Okay, cool. So we now have our rocket. We've got an animation controller on there to control the animations. We now have a clip to play some for animation. So let's actually do the animation now. By the end of this week, I'll probably set animation about 100 times. So if we go to window at the top, we're going to go down. We're going to access the animation window. And this will appear kind of like a timeline. And where I want you to put it is I want you to put it somewhere along the bottom. So in this case, I'm going to place it at the very bottom so you can see that it is there. Now this is a bit of a problem because my screen is kind of a bit too small for it to fit. So I'm going to change to a slightly different layout. So this will probably make it a lot easier to see what I'm doing. Select the rocket. Okay, window, animation. Okay, so we have window animation. And what you'll notice here is the animation window's changed a bit. So who used Unity before 4.3, like the old animation window? Okay, a couple of dudes. So what this animation window does is it allows you to animate anything you want about the rocket. And I'm going to get you guys to, we're going to have a little bit of break in a second. I'm going to get you guys to basically animate it however you want this rocket in that break. Like whatever you want it to do. Scale over size and flex and glow green, whatever it is. So what you'll notice here is the animation window is fairly bare. And if we click Add Curve, what it's going to do is it's going to get all the components from our rocket, so every single thing about our rocket, and it's going to give a list. It's going to say, what do you actually want to animate about it? So in this case, I want to animate, so if I open up the transform, I want to animate the scale. So I want to say, over time, the scale of the rocket is going to animate. So if you click the plus, what we have here is we have the two little dots. And with these dots in the end here, these are keyframes. So these keyframes basically say, at this particular point on the timeline, our rocket is now at this particular size. It has this particular value. So if you click the little play button, this might be a bit easier. If you click the play button, what you can see is that the timeline is going to play through. It's going to get to the end. It's going to go back to the beginning. And currently our rocket isn't really doing anything. But what we'll notice is we have the scale properties. So we can go into here. We can say it starts off at 1. And perhaps it ends up at a scale of 2 by 2, for example. So now what it's going to do is it's going to automatically tween that and say, at this point it's 1, then over time it progresses, and eventually gets to 2. So now when I play my rocket, it's going to increase over time, and that's what rocket underscore flying is going to do. So now if I run my game, and I start firing rockets, basically my rockets are now going to be constantly throbbing, like that. Now, as well as animating things like the scale, you can add extra curves. So you can go in here, you can add a new sprite renderer, you can add all sorts of things. So if I went to add curve, sprite renderer, color, I can then say, as well as my rocket is that massive over time, if I drag my playheads to the halfway down the animation, I can then go into here and pick a new color. Now, this is all okay, but what you'll notice is that if I change any of these values on the far right-hand side, it automatically keyframes for you. It takes where your playhead is, so for example, halfway through the animation, and it basically adds in the clip. So if I said halfway through, my rocket is now going to be bright green. What it will do is it will basically keyframe in the beginning, keyframe that it's green halfway, and then it's going to fade it to whatever the original color is. So now my rocket is kind of like
glowing green in the end. Awesome. So what I want you to do now is we'll take like a little 10-15 minute break. But partly on that break, I want you to like obviously get some coffee or water or whatever it may be. Just kind of play around these animations. Try making your rocket rotate over time, or try changing things such as perhaps increase its mass over time or something like that. So basically play around with all these different curves, adds different things. So I'm going to make my rocket to rotate as well. So as we're, just a little quick thing. So as we have our rocket basically flying and rotating and things like that, remember that we're doing it to this rocket, the one in our scene. We're not doing it to the one that we have in our project, the master copy. So if we wanted to say, okay, I'm pretty happy with what this rocket looks like in our scene, overwrite this master copy, there's a couple ways you can do that. You can just drag and drop this rocket over the top of that one, or if you select the rocket in the inspector, you have a little apply button, click apply. Basically that says, the master copy we have here, that's old. This one here in the scene view, which has been changed and edited and built on top of, that's our new master copy. So yeah, click the apply button. So I've now got a little animation where my rocket it does a 180 spin, glows green, and increases over size, which is kind of cool. So what I want to say is, that's much better than my rubbish rocket in my master prefab. I can click apply. So now every single rocket I fire now is now going to... It's now like a tidal wave of green rockets, and they all spin round. They only spin halfway, so I'm now going to amend that. So I kind of want you to just, guys, test out what you can do and have fun with the animation system. And also have a little break.